Afternoon all. I had an interesting over the ball game last night in the Herts League. I think my confidence was still a bit low considering the brilliant game I seemed to be having the game before last night, where I was winning but sort of blew it. I allowed this queen sack. So I don't know, I had some deep founded pessimism about winning actually last night. And you might think, how does deep founded pessimism affect your game? And superficially you might think, well, I'm optimistic because of the opening, because of a good position. And someone asked me on YouTube, sometimes it's difficult to orientate yourself like that just because you have a good position. Say you've been beaten up in a particular league, or last 2 or 3 games you blew chances. Plays in your mind. When you reach those positions, maybe the darkness spreads, the pessimism comes into the foreground, even if you were optimistic earlier in the game. And the end result is you might miss key resources. That's the key thing. Same with over-optimism. Say you've got a brilliant position and you become over-optimistic and you move quickly and you miss key resources. So in both cases actually, either pessimism or optimism, if you're pessimistic in a great position and miss a key resource and move too quickly, it's bad. You're getting away from the truth of the position, away from the logic of position, and it's causing abruptness really, either optimism or pessimism, I think, for decision making, and abruptness which will mean you miss key things. Okay, so although the opening I was optimistic and I had played a 15-minute game in this very variation recently on a live commentary game with a beautiful win against someone quite high rated, the optimism was superficial, as I say, I think, but we'll play through the moves to show you what I mean. So it started off with me as white playing e4, and after knight f6, knight c3, he plays d5. So my initial thought about e5 was I'd be delighted if he played knight fd7. However, I'd be worried if he played knight e4. Not knight e4, pardon me, what am I talking about? After e5 I was worried. I'll show you e5 anyway just to get to the position. We're on about d4. I should really be booked up on this more. Because I didn't really fancy this line told about years ago, where it seems as though white might have an advantage in terms of structure here. Fragmenting pawns, this is what someone mentioned years ago in this line. But it's simplified without the queens on, less tension. It's a lower rated player, so I didn't really fancy my chances greatly in this line. I wasn't really convinced about doubled pawns, so I did want to avoid the double pawns. So here, what way is we're avoiding? Sorry, the exchange of queens. Pardon me, the exchange of queens. So I played b takes here. I mean, this might be more attacking. I don't know. I need to investigate this position. Or if g takes. So both sides would have double pawns, and I don't know. Maybe that's okay as well to consider. But in the game, I was licking my lips a bit. So optimism here, as I say, but there's a deep-founded background pessimism, which shows itself later. The other aspect of this game, I found numerous aspects of this game. I've been thinking about this game a bit, last night and today. Is the two kind of stories, like a Toy Story, like a story from Pixar Studios. They design their cartoons for kids, but also adults at the same time. And I wonder in chess if we can consider tactics alike for kids and strategy, the deeper, longer term structural constraints. Harmony is like the strategic crush, and the tactical interplay is like adults and kids at the same time. And when we're going through a chess game, it's like there are two stories unfolding here. And basically I think I make as though my story here is going to be for kids, more tactical, because I play this move which does have good stats in this position, this pawn sack, which gives me some optimism for the opening. And it's revealed later in the postmortem, this is one version he was dreading someone would play one day, as he hasn't really, I don't think, researched it that well. But he seems to know some of the key dangers about castling kingside, because he did not commit to castling kingside, as we're about to see. But the two stories, let's call one story Strategic Crush, aimed at adults, and at the same time, Tactics, aimed at kids. Like, so you're going to see Toy Story, and you know, it's good for adults and kids. So in this game at the moment, it looks as though, from a kid's point of view, that surely I'm just going to destroy black here. After d4, he plays knight f6. I have a basic plan. Well, strategically, a bit of a more adult plan. I want to keep a grip on e5, like I've said in live commentary games. And so it doesn't matter about c5, surely. Okay, so I'll keep a grip on e5, welcome maybe c5, try and arrange my pieces maybe like this, and maybe pounce with knight b5 in the future. Okay, so there are two stories unfolding, you know, strategically and tactically. But it looks as though, you know, in terms of central squares, I've got my eye on the ball here for these two central squares in particular, to keep a bind on them. In fact, it's this square which I don't normally play on, but just this one, and maybe c5 isn't so bad to allow. Actually, it does open some roads into black's position. And I thought, though, the omission of c5 might actually mean b4 is possible, because at the moment, you know, when you play b4, okay, there's a5, and often the bishop's blocked in by a pawn on e7, so it might be more justified, it seems, in principle, that you'd expect black to be trying to liberate the centre and the position with c5 later. But he played kind of disturbingly and too intuitively. After knight f3, he shocked me. He shocked me with this next move, bishop d7. Now, on one tactical level, the story for children could be, I'm just going to play knight e5, bishop d3, g4, g5, maybe queen h5. That's the story for children. The other story for children is g6. Say, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to destroy his position. I'm going to weaken his king. I'm going to have a blast, sacking the exchange if knight e5 and knight h5. So there's two stories for children. Very fast, very tactical, to do with king safety. The stories for adults here, in this position, might be more about e5 control. It's questionable, a bit more controversial, is it about c5 control? This next move, queen c8, didn't seem to react to my children's story. In fact, it's almost as if he's playing out an adult story here. There's an asset black has, which is quite subtle, which I didn't really factor in at all. I didn't actually know the mystery behind these two moves until, you know, a few minutes in. I thought, well, maybe queen c8 is c5. But I found an unpleasantness with queen a5 later, so even this, it looks wrong. What is going on here? But in fact, black's position is a pawn up, and in fact, f7 might actually be useful to have a go at with a knight maneuver like this. So the queen vacating, I don't know if this is an original super grandmaster plan never tried before in a position that he stumbled on, but it isn't as silly as it seems to look. And also, it's just now caused an over provocation, perhaps, that why hasn't black played the move c5 to try and liberate his position? Why, I ask? You know, why is he letting me seemingly play b4, which would give me a bind on two key central squares? Why not? So I'm attracted to play b4 here, and I play it because I'm not worried about a5, because I thought b5, and I can sort of then play an en passant if needed as an option. So knight c6, another move that confused me, is I thought, what is going on here? Where is this knight heading? I wasn't sure what he was doing at this point, but now it's revealed, knight d8, and he's going into knight f7. So he's telling an adult story. If this was Toy Story, I'm telling a children's story still. How do I hack him up? How do I get this hack attack working? But the adult story that he's telling has now got more sinister undertones potentially, that I've got underminable weaknesses now to a5, and I've got weaknesses here in theory, because these pawns are leaving behind weaknesses that might be weak later. c3, this might be weak later as an entrance for rook a2s, etc., or rook a1s if he plays a5 and ab later. So anyway, I carry on telling the children's story tactically. I don't really know what he's doing at this point. And after knight e5, he surprises me again. He plays knight f7, inviting an exchange of knights. But I thought, hold on, I'm going to keep the tension. If I take, maybe I'm relieving him a little bit, getting rid of this beautiful knight. Why not just reinforce the knight? So I carry on telling the children's story with f4, thinking, well, I'm just tactically going to smash him up. g4, g5, queen h5, and the game. Thanks very much. Back to the adult story about undermining myself, and also now I've hemmed in the bishop. More sinister undertone is creeping in to the position. And what really is building up here is a kind of latency for strategic backfire for any tactics which do not work out if the opponent is telling an adult story about strategic crush and things are getting more and more sinister. Note the weaknesses, note the bad bishop. Things are getting more sinister from the adult point of view of the position. And even this knight can reroute masterfully into key squares. Things are getting more sinister for white. Strategic backfire of any faulty combinations. This could start to look ugly for white, be ending up with a bad bishop, ending up with loads of weaknesses to exploit. So he plays a5. And again, it gets more sinister again. Instead of playing b5, I thought, no, I don't want to play b5. I don't want to allow c5, but the counterplay, I'm going to squash him. I'm going to make sure he can't do any freeing moves, which looks as though it's strategical in nature, but at what cost? I'm maintaining pawns on dark squares like drafts with my dark square bishop. So now, what would we say about the amount of strategic backfire from any faulty combinations? I'm trying to still tell this kid story, which seems promising still, that I've got g4, g5 and queen h5, but the adult story is getting more and more sinister now. He opens up the A file and now plays knight d6. Aronian would start being proud about black's control of f5 and the light squares. Okay, maybe he wouldn't like double pawns in this position or the hemmed in bishop. As long as g6 is not played, it's not feeding the children's story of black being totally annihilated. In fact, from the adult point of view, if the adult story, you want to get away from the children elements of the position. You want to tuck your king in safety to emphasize the longer term strategic aspects, emphasize the bad bishop, the weak pawns, the vacuums. You want those all emphasized. So I carry on with my children's story with g4, and he reacts. He moves his king as though it's plummeted, going towards safety. In the queen side, king d8. So what has he left behind of tactical value for me to attack? Well, as it turns out, there is a tactical issue in black's position. So I go for it. What I see as the tactical issue is still the rook on h8. If I can get in this queen h5. Okay. Now here, someone once said, if you see a good move, look for a better one. I would say that if the game is unfolding as two separate stories and the opponent is spelling out an adult story, each move of strategical value, and you're trying to spell out a tactical story, I would say when you see a seemingly winning tactic, to be highly cynical about strategic backfire. Highly cynical, and make sure when you play that seemingly winning tactic that there isn't tons and tons of counterplay, because in that situation where you've been strategically crushed from the opponent, the strategic backfire is going to be extremely painful, as this game vividly demonstrates. I'm going tactically for a rook, but I must make sure I try for that rook in the precise manner, because the context is starting to get quite sinister here, with lots of pawns accumulating on dark squares, with lots of weaknesses accumulating, and now yet another pawn on a dark square with g5. Okay, but the children's story is unfolding, you might say. Yes, knight f8 and now queen h5 with numerous tactical threats, but the one I had my eye on was simply bishop takes h7 to stop the rook from moving, and then knight g6 to exterminate that rook. That's the children's story I was aiming for. And here is the blunder of the game, because up until this point, believe it or not, even though black, without any freeing maneuvers, c5 or e5, computers are not impressed by this bind on c5 and e5. In context, there is a sinisterness built up behind it for this bind. It's been at great cost. This knight is very good here, so any combinations involving this knight, as I say, one has to be cynical, because the backfire is going to be heavy. Not only will I lose that good knight, I'll be left with the horrendousness, the horror of my position will be left as a remnant, yeah, for this tactical story which tried to be told, but now was the point where it could have won the game actually after c6. To my horror in post-mortem, hours after the game, until I checked with a computer, I didn't even know the obvious tactic here, to be honest. Maybe he wants an escape square of his king to carry on telling his adult story without embarrassingly getting smothered mated. He makes way for his king. But he misses out on a key tactic, which I miss. I wonder if I just give you 10 seconds. Can you find the key tactic here? Non-controversial. Better than bishop takes h7. I'm pretty sure most of you will find it. I'm shocked it didn't occur to me. If I just give you 10 seconds, I'm pretty sure 95% of you will find it. So 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, there's a winning, non-controversial blow, far superior to bishop takes h7. As I say, and this might occur in your own games, you might recognise this. If your game was like a Pixar story and there were two stories being told, and the opponent was quietly spelling out a maturer strategic crush story, and you were trying to spell out a tactical story, and your tactics go wrong, you will receive wrath, counterplay, weaknesses, disgusting pieces like the bishop on c1. And I play it the wrong way. I should have played knight g6, which, okay, it uses up that valuable knight, but it leads to another set of double pawns if take and losing the exchange, and then the bishop is also in trouble. So that would be a total disaster. Knight g6 is the crushing move in this position, because if rook g8 as well, there's queen takes h7. Okay, so now this would be good, big advantage and winning, but was it deserved? Wasn't white strategically crushed? In fact, black could have played the children's story a bit more aggressively here, to be left with a lot of strategic trump cards, pressure on the A file, weaknesses to exploit, and the bad bishop. There was something quite resourceful here in this position. If we load up an engine here, and I'll show you, g6, minimal advantage for white. Knight takes, or is it g6, pardon me, or even earlier there was something, or here, knight, here, okay, let's go with g6. Now knight takes g6 is the strongest, sacrificing the exchange, and it seems overall that white might be better, but bishop g7, it's not without problems. There is pressure on d4, this bishop is bad, this knight can come to f5. There are weaknesses, and there is pressure on the a file, which demonstrates that black's play, although looking absurd, might actually unveil itself to show good quality pieces pretty soon. After bishop takes d4, it's not a huge advantage for white in this sort of position. It might actually be crawling to be better for black at some point, if white's not careful. White's underdeveloped anyway. It could be tricky. C5 is now on the cards as a liberating breakout. So anyway, in the game stories, as I say, the context is quite punishing now, the strategic context of getting some tactic wrong. And I got a tactic, unfortunately, wrong. I played bishop takes h7. And here, the opponent could have massively improved again. They played actually g6, which wasn't the most accurate move. In this position, knight c7 apparently, which vacates e8 for the bishop, you see. Pardon me. So if knight g6, but there's bishop e8 now, and black would be better, in fact, as you see from this evaluation. What have I done with my pieces? I'm just stuffed them over the king side badly. Left with a disaster of a position behind, with all these factors, all these weaknesses. Total disaster this would be. So knight c8, major improvement. Sorry, knight c7 would be a major improvement. I'll have to start playing very accurate technical moves. My computer to survive. Queen g6 apparently to unpin and keep the bishop intact, and then be able to go back to d3 on bishop e8 is one way. Okay, I might have a small advantage. Difficult to play position. Okay, so the strategic backdrop is now very, very punishing, and it's in this kind of situation actually. Well, earlier here, to be aware of that, to be aware of being strategically crushed, that you were trying to tell this children's story, that actually the opponent was trying to tell an adult story, and their adult story is going to come to the forefront if your children's story doesn't pay off, which it doesn't here, the way I played it, because I played bishop takes h7. After g6, again, I have an opportunity to get this right, to get an advantage, even from this position. Even from now, giving black the option to gain tempos, to get to f5 strategically. After knight takes g7, a disturbance happens now. My team captain, Roy, who had a disastrous opening, has managed to play a deflection tactic on his board, like rook d1 chain. He was very excited and animated. I don't know, shaking as though he was very lucky, and I wasn't sure what he was trying to communicate. And I felt a bit embarrassed as well, thinking, is he celebrating that the opponent was a bunny or something? I didn't really know. So I had some emotional shock, and it seems that I might have actually calculated at some point in this game the fact that I could have gotten away with knight g7, queen moves, knight f5, then queen h3. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it might have occurred to me that I was winning because of this sequence. So this disturbance happens now, and as I say, especially in the scenario where the opponent's telling the adult story and you're getting strategically crushed, you've got to get the tactics right. That's not the best time in the game for a major disturbance, letting you forget key, accurate analysis. Now, in this position after knight g7, it occurred to me after the disturbance, hold on, what was I thinking of? Queen h3, isn't that just e5? Oh dear, am I losing this? And now the principle of lazy evaluation kicked in from the week before, and a general sort of negativeness, lack of optimism, huge pessimism really came to the scene now, thinking, this looks like last week's game all of a sudden, and as such, am I going to really blow a good position? The objective reality, I think, is I've been outplayed on a certain story perspective, the adult story. I have been outplayed because I'm left with terrible, terrible weaknesses, self-inflicted. Passive rook, active rook here, lots of weaknesses behind those, lots of light square weaknesses. F5 in particular could be juicy for a black knight. So that's the objective reality, that if I was aiming for a tactical story, that it needed high tactics precision. And here I fail again. I consider only two choices when in fact this is another issue with the game I have, that the principle of lazy evaluation sort of assumes you've got all available options marked out before you start to assess theoretical risk of those options. That's not the case. If you're optimistic or you spend more time finding resources, then you can start to assign theoretical risk. But if you don't find the key moves first in your list, then you're restricting your options. And I restricted my options. I suddenly thought Queen H3 doesn't look right. And I didn't really consider, well, I considered for a bit a queen sacrifice as well to get out of it. Queen H6, knight here maybe takes. And I didn't really think this was sound, this queen sack idea. I thought, surely I'm letting the opponent back in the game here. You know, you can just, I don't know, play this and get his queen out and win H6. And this looks a bit disgusting in my position. This queen sack can't be right. Indeed, the queen sack is not particularly good. Somehow it escaped my attention of a kind of weakness of the last move based tactic, which is yet another thread of this game, which I was going to say and I'm going to say now, that, you know, this idea of ownership. Do you own, when you find resources, you look for your own amazing resources. So I'm looking at Queen E2, Queen H3, looking at these amazing resources, but you're not looking at the opponent's moves as being resourceful in manipulating the opponent's resources. It's as if you're in charge of your pieces, right? The opponent is in charge of their pieces. What rights do you have to influence the opponent's pieces? Well, what do we have in chess? Decoys, deflections, drag and drop tactics, which are a form of decoy, are basically the same thing. So, of course, tactical armory often involves manipulating the opponent's resources. So for you to be greater resourceful, it's not just what you do with your pieces, it's where you position or encourage the opponent to position their resources. So in fact, when I was preparing my initial annotation of this game, it's a key tactic. I'm not part of my armory, the weakness of the last move, but how would you provoke weaknesses of the last move? You could add another D for it. I thought dreadful moves. What dreadful move, in the light of E5 being possible, could I encourage the opponent to do? And it should have maybe occurred in the D toolkit, you know, deflection, decoy, drag and drop, but maybe dreadful is a fourth one to consider as part of your resource armory, your creativity, that you manipulate the opponent's pieces. It's your right to be resourceful in that respect. And in fact, there's a very clever, nifty way of reaching H3 without any of these issues of E5. In fact, there's two ways. Two! And, I don't know, that disturbance during the game, I'm going to get caned, as I say, because in strategic backdrop of the position, my position's hopeless. I can't castle anywhere. I can't castle queenside. The H-file is going to be dangerous if I don't win the rook. There's holes everywhere in the position. And I also have this thing about being resourceful. Is it with your own pieces or your opponents? No. The 4 Ds show you can be resourceful with the opponent's moves. So Queen H4, actually, what does it do? It still threatens to win the rook, forcing, basically, either of the knights to F5. And what will be the problem with that? Clearly, this is not on H3 anymore. Queen H3. This didn't occur to me. I was disturbed at this point. I was disturbed. Lazy evaluation kicks in. I haven't seen all the resources of the position. I've got some hang up over resources to do with moving the opponent's pieces around, manipulating them, and weaknesses of the last move, as if they only occur by accident when the opponent blunders. No, you can create the opponent's weaknesses of the last move. You can drag and drop the opponent's pieces. You can deflect them. You can decoy them. Your resourcefulness is on the opponent's pieces as well as your own. Queen H6 or Queen H4 here should be part of the tactical armory of kind of interfering with H3 control. So this is the hang up I had last night. Why did I not see Queen H4? I can only think of the disturbance. So, lazy evaluation. What's the least risky thing I can do here then? Considering I seem to be in trouble. I end up playing, and there's another option to minimise counterplay, which is important in the backdrop of things. I end up playing Queen E2, when in fact Queen F3 would have been more prudent, with the same idea that I can take on F8 and control H3. And of course, no, I play Queen E2 and I hand black the full nightmare waiting for me I've been strategically destroyed. The opponent's adult story now unfolds spectacularly. My children's story has been wiped out with this very, very bad set of moves that have occurred now. He might as well be Iranian controlling the f5 square with a terrible bishop. It's like being outplayed in the French defence. Left my light square bishop gone, my key knight gone, left with a terrible bishop, tons and tons of weaknesses, a dreadful position at the cost of winning a pawn. So he might have done this all for a positional pawn sacrifice. So rook takes h7, so I lose my light square bishop and light square control. Lots of weaknesses. Note queen f3 would have guarded h3 as well, so I've made matters worse by allowing even more counterplay than needed. So I take the bishop, and no, he doesn't move the rook meekly now. The aggression of his position starts to unfold with rook h3. And I sensed I'd blown it here. I sensed, what is this position? Why did I do this to myself? Why do I have this disgusting position, a pawn up? It looks as though almost that bishop d2 is going to fall to something horrible, like knight f5 attacking the bishop, or d4. What would I do about d4 then? Queen f2? Maybe he's got rook c3. Well, if he used the other knight, you know, maybe coming to e4 to fork pieces. It looked disgusting, this position, if you look at it. I'm forced into a contortion type move. This isn't what I had planned for. I can just say yes, I ticked some boxes earlier for minimising strategic breaks at great strategic cost elsewhere in my position, and now I'm paying the price. I've also played a faulty tactic. So the adult story is well and truly unfolded of strategic disaster. I play rook b3. So we start to see I've got weak light squares, my light square bishop's gone, I've got a terrible bishop, he's got the active a file, he's got f5 control, he's got an active rook. This knight has to be swapped off for his crappy bishop. What a total and utter disaster. Totally wrecked my position. Knight gf5, and I did vaguely think, hang on, isn't there a tactic or something with knight a4, knight d5 of king c7? There was some faint hope of a tactical blunder. He doesn't have to do that. And then I thought, you know, maybe knight a4 is interesting at some point, or queen g4. In fact, there's a very interesting move based on the g-pawn here, which requires great pyrotechnical skills and dynamic calculation skills, which an engine picks up on. Believe it or not, even this seemingly ruined position, even in this position, an engine will find an amazing resource based on the g-pawn, which is spectacular in its own right. Does it even deserve to exist here? So I've committed what I've proposed is a major sin. Okay, that there are two stories in the game, that the opponent's telling an adult one, you're telling a children's one. Get the tactics right, otherwise the backfire is going to be huge. Backfire's huge here, but the children's story did reap this passed pawn. That's one remnant of that children's story. And in fact, engine analysis here reveals, believe it or not, knight a4 eventually. Knight a4 is about to magically come onto the horizon here. Do you see this? With advantage to white. It's startling. It's startling. Knight a4. Knight takes d4, winning that pawn. If rook takes b3, you see, let's just follow this for a sec. So, analysis earlier. C takes, and this isn't so bad. You know, knight takes, the queen might, I think, go over here. Or even queen d3, okay, protecting b3 for a moment. And if the knight moved back here, okay, we've got knight b6 as well. And we can actually win d7. So there's tactics in the position, because also, as well as the g-pawn, pardon me, there's tactical pressure lurking around in this position. So knight a4 is a highly tactical move, which, if, okay, say takes to get rid of knight b6's c5, takes, and now I think we're going to evidence the G pawn. Say queen takes a4, we might be evidencing the G pawn as one of the remnants, that this gives white, and the exchange up of course, and control of a1. This gives white an advantage, that even in that ruined position, it shows the resources in chess are absolutely stunning. Knight a4, it didn't really occur to me. But the beautiful line of this is knight takes d4 with a queen sack, rook takes h3, and in this line I lose the queen with knight b6, forking rook, queen and bishop. So he'd say he takes on c1, not moving the queen. See, if he moves the queen here, knight takes a8, and the queen, hasn't got a5 because of that pawn. So this wreckage actually has some value, amazingly. And then this pawn can be the hero, forcing knight e8 to stop the pawn queening. Check. King takes, king takes. Now this pawn's dangerous. Check. And we see rook g1. Look, all of a sudden the children's story, the remnant of the children's story, is celebrated, with apparently white being better here. So this is why chess is so incredibly hard. We're in the middle of Pixar motion, animated picture. Two stories unfolding at the same time. The backfires, seemingly disastrous in principle, leave remnants sometimes which can be picked up on tactically. So maybe there's always hope for the resourceful. I didn't see any of that. Knight a4, amazing idea to sack the queen, to try and celebrate the remnants. And even this one is controlling a5 in that line. Even this one is controlling, attacking d7. Amazing stuff. But no, I play a move which just gives black easy advantage, of course. I play queen g2, which is just attacking the rook. Okay. And he plays rook h8, and I have to do something with the knight. I think knight g8 was better than what I played, just giving up d4. Even that, I thought, isn't that too dangerous, giving up d4? There's a method to the madness here, apparently. Rook a3, which I missed. So that would be better than the game, because I would have a knight on e5. No, I make things a lot worse. This apparently is equal. Again, the remarkable resources in chess. But that makes the most out of the remnants of the position, just sacking d4, being able to play rook a3 to neutralise that pressure. But no, I make things a lot worse. I play knight takes d7. Technically I'm a pawn up, but the position is a total disaster here. Better for black. Compared to what it was, I'm saying, knight e2. Okay, it's a minus nearly half pawn advantage at depth 18. You wouldn't say technically it's a total disaster. And thankfully it was good enough. Now, I offer the draw. I was disgusted with what happened. I offer the draw. From the position I had, I was totally optimistic, and it was all shattered. So there's a few morals of the story in this game. There's a few. Let me summarise. Try to. That in the game of chess, the strategy and tactics interplay is like two stories in a Pixar animated cartoon. One for adults and one for cartoon. One for adults and one for children. If you're telling the children's story and you're actually strategically crushed in the process, then you can expect huge strategic backfire, tons of counterplay from the opponent, and a wrecked position, or even a positional sacrifice in the opponent to emphasise their strategic trump cards. That's what you can expect. If you can expect that, then your precision needs to go up, and you don't need any major disturbances during the game. You've got to get your tactics absolutely right. The twist on this is, even in a strategically wrecked position, your children's story might have left remnants of things like pawns lurking around, knights lurking around, which actually are tactically useful for a queen sacrifice or other types of sacrifice. So that's something to look out for, even when a disaster occurs. So this is the complexity of chess that we're passengers in. We are just spectators of chess. I think we're kidding ourselves for understanding the game compared to engines. The tactical, dynamicness of the game, the strategical aspects, the visual aspects, the compensation, the subtle compensation you can get, even when a plan fails, is absolutely staggering, as this shows. it was a disaster for me, but I thought it was kind of an amusing disaster, so I'm not sure I'm as gutted as I should be. Let's have a look in overview and summary. So I play this kind of sharp, but recommended actually statistically, pawn gambit, which he had dreaded. And actually, sorry, the final punchline of the game, when he accepted the door, he said he didn't trust himself to win the position. So he had some bleakness, I think, from previous results in the season. He'd even lost to me earlier in the season, so I don't blame him, I guess. No, but he lost to some other people as well. Okay. I just didn't know what he was doing. He provoked me into creating drafts out of my pawns and drafty weaknesses behind the pawns later on. He just provoked me with his moves like Queen C8. I was totally provoked. So of course the strategic backfire is going to be heavy here. I've hemmed in my bishop, created a huge vacuum. We can say, I think, that if tactics fell, it's going to be extremely painful. The tactical basis for this was now G4, G5, Queen H5. I could have been tempted with Knight F7. It might be a way for a small advantage from an engine point of view instead of F4. It's far less committal. It doesn't block in the bishop. Bishop's still got the scope. If we look at this position, well, you can look at it. I'll give you the PGN in the description of the video. But what I'm doing is strategically disastrous. As I say, the children's story is being told without reference to the more adult themes in the game. He puts away his king. Good idea. Doesn't play G6 too early for H4, H5. Gives his king an escape square, avoid any embarrassing smothered mate on F7. But here, the tactical crunch time, I miss. Knight G6. No questions asked. So if you see a good tactic, especially when you're strategically busted, look for a better one which doesn't offer the opponent tons of counterplay and for their story to unfold with great success. So bishop takes H7, carried on with more faulty tactics here. After G6, knight takes G7. I could have just played either Queen H6 to force Knight F5, Queen H3, because this works as well. Creating this dreadful Knight F5 blocking the bishop. But no, I make things 100 times worse than they need to be. I play Queen E2, thinking that's the least risky option. In fact, that's the most risky option compared to these other alternatives. Just winning a pawn, leaving my position a total wreck. I make things even worse now with this next move coming up after Rook H8. Instead of playing Knight G6, sacking D4 to play Rook A3. No, I make things a lot worse. I play Knight takes D7. I'm lucky, very lucky, he didn't play on. Now you might think, well, okay, how does Black actually increase the pressure here? Black's got these gorgeous Nimzovician knights and the A file and the H file, and every single piece of Black is brilliant. King's safe as houses. Black can continue. Let's just follow it a bit. Say Queen, say King, Queen G8. I think anything really. Let's say Queen G8. I'm sure Black doesn't lose any advantage here. Queen G7. I think it's going to start to be painful. It looks as though I should be punished, but okay, Black's better. Okay, maybe it's not outright. There isn't an outright clear knockout punch, so maybe there is some basis for him being a bit concerned about blundering. But I think it's difficult for Black to blow the position here because of this huge grip with the knights. Okay, you probably haven't got much from this game. I thought it was interesting though to treat the game as a kind of Toy Story with two perspectives. I thought it was an interesting take on it. But there's also the idea of the 4Ds, deflection, decoy, drag and drop, and dreadful as the toolkit for controlling the opponent's resources, not your own. So when you're resourceful, think of the 4Ds to control the opponent's resources as part of your own resourcefulness. The other thing is, even if your story does end in disaster, what are the remnants of that story? Pawns, pieces in weird places, can they be used for a queen sack? And another idea which was shown in this game was the idea of actually being deeply pessimistic in critical moments, even if you were optimistic earlier, resulting in moves being played too quickly in those critical moments, missing key resources, creating that huge backfire which might be evident like in games like this. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks so much.